I mean, look at the authors.
Okay, thank you all so much for coming in this afternoon. So we are very excited to have Sahil Gandhi with us, who actually used to be a full-time here at CSEP a couple of years ago. So we're happy to have you back. I mean, I know you're still non-resident, but it's good to see you here in person. And the topic will be to kind of understand, and this is something that CSCP has been trying to work on a little more as well, is more on the risks of adaptation. So we couple of weeks ago also had some folks from McKinsey who came and spoke to us also about how they are thinking of adaptation and kind of the global evidence on that. So I think this talk is a nice continuation of kind of those conversations. And I mean, we live in Delhi, so we know that every couple of months we have some kind of global adaptation need. It's either too hot, or the roads are flooded, or we are in a really dystopic air pollution. So I mean, in that sense, whatever's happening with climate change is happening now, and it's happening here. Um, so I won't take up more time. I think we're already starting a few minutes late. But I will give the stage to Sahil, who will present the paper that he recently worked on. And then we will have our discussants who will come in for about 10, maybe 10 minutes each. And then we can have a more kind of free flowing conversation. And then after that, we can open the floor up. So with that, I will.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Pooja. Really appreciate it. And thanks to CSEP and Shishir for hosting me and my paper. Uh, okay. So, so this is a paper titled Global Evidence on Urban Resilience and Adaptation to Flood Risk. And this is co-authored with Matt Khan from USC, Rajat Kochar, Soumik Lal, and Vaidhi Tandil. This photo out here is of the Thames barrier, and this was built in 1980s. London witnessed a massive flood in 1950, and in response to that, the Thames barrier was built. The 1950s flood actually led to a lot of lives lost in London, and that's one of the reasons why this was built. And cities around the world have been building things, have been adapting to flood risk. There is we have Jakarta, which is building the sea wall. You have other sea walls. The Amsterdam has one which has been built. So this paper is a paper that looks at whether adaptation makes cities more resilient. And especially we look at whether there is differences across cities in low income countries and cities in high income countries. Now, this shouldn't be a shock to the audience that floods over the last many decades have gone up. You see that the floods have gone up in both upper and upper middle income countries and lower middle income countries. But interestingly, the distribution of floods has been very similar across these two country groups, which is low income countries and upper income countries. However, the destruction these floods cause in cities in high and low income countries is very different. And this is just an anecdotal evidence that Manchester witnessed a flood in 2025, Mumbai witnessed a flood in 2025, but Mumbai saw tremendous loss of capital and lives. But Manchester did not see that. And of course, this is very anecdotal. The reasons for floods across these two cities would be very different. And this is also shown in this figure. This is a figure which shows percentage of deaths caused by floods. And here you see that the deaths caused by floods in low income country classification is much higher than high income country classification. So the destruction floods cause in low income countries is much more. There is severe loss of lives. So this is the paper that looks at what is the impact of floods across cities in high and low income countries. We look at urban activity as one of our main outcome variables. We also have some regressions that look at deaths where the dependent variable is the number of deaths due to floods. We test different we test for different evidence for resilience in these different cities. We test whether deaths are falling over time in these cities caused by floods. We test whether economic activity hit, like the damage caused by floods on economic activities falling over time, and whether there is learning through experience in these cities. If a city has faced higher number of floods in the historic period, has there been learning such that when there is the next marginal flood, the impact is lesser because of the learning? Now, after doing these resilient tests, we try to understand these results through adaptation, like what is the mechanism for these resilience. We look at whether if a area is risky, then do we see less population growth? Is that because of greater outmigration or lesser in-migration? If a place has better critical infrastructure, does that attenuate the impact of floods? Does that protect the city from floods? And if a city is downstream from a dam, does that protect the city from the floods impact? So we contribute to several literature sets, and the first literature set that we contribute to is this paper that looks at the impact of floods on cities globally, and this is an AEJ applied paper in 2020. Now, the paper only looked at 53 large flood events, and it looked at only cities, mostly flood events in low-income countries. So we add to this literature set by looking at the universe of floods from 2012 to 2023, and we look at monthly nightlights data. That earlier paper looked at annual nightlights, which is the DMPS data set, but however, we make use of the WEES data set to understand economic activity. Now, there has been a bunch of literature on adaptation of floods. And we know that in the US, there is migration that is happening due to climate change. People are not moving to risky places. There's been recent work by Alan Shaw, which is RNR at AER, that looks at the impact of the sea wall and whether that's actually causing moral hazard problems such that there is going to be adaptation in the short run, but that's going to lead to long run implications because that is going to lock in people into risky places. They are not going to be migrating to safer regions which are going to be slightly more elevated. There's this paper by Duflo and Pandey that looked at the impact of dams on agricultural output in India. And there's a third literature set that we contribute to is on climate justice. And we contribute to this literature by looking at the impact of floods and its differential impact across cities in high-income countries and cities in low-income countries. Now, to do such a data, to test a bunch of our hypotheses, we had to go through almost 2 to 3 years of data collection and cleaning, and that took away a lot of our time and effort, apart from getting it published. So a lot of our efforts went in data collection, and we had to really harmonize a lot of different data sets to do this study. The first thing that we needed to collect was what are cities, like what are our city boundaries. Now, for this, we made use of the Global Human Settlement Urban database, and we land up with around 9,500 urban regions around the world. Now, these are kind of metropolitan regions. They are going to be including the peripheral area as well. So it will include Mumbai, Vasai Virar, Navi Mumbai. So we are not just looking at the city boundaries, but we are looking at it as if it's an economic boundary, the agglomeration of the urban area. Now, the second data set that we require for this is the flood database. And for this, we look at the GDIS data, which is the global database, which has all flood events geocoded in it. And it also provides flood-related deaths in the GDIS data. Now, in order to address some robustness of the data, we also make use of precipitation data, and we use to classify flood events, and we use precipitation data to come up with a measure which is called an extreme precipitation event, which is the 99th percentile of that city specific distribution. So you have a precipitation distribution for each city, and then we take the 99th percentile of that distribution to call that the extreme precipitation events. Now, one of the concerns with the GDIS, the MDAT data, is that there could be potential underreporting of floods in low-income countries. Now, we address that by doing a power law analysis, and we look at the distribution of deaths across high and low income countries. And our hypothesis here is that if there is no underreporting, then the distribution, there is no underreporting in low income countries, then the distribution for low income countries is going to be very similar to what it is for high income countries. And this is what we exactly find. We find that the distribution of deaths across these two different kind of income categories, the distribution of death caused by floods across these two different categories is very similar. You in fact see that in blue, the deaths caused by floods is much higher in low income countries than in high income countries. But the overall pattern is very, very similar. Now, for coming up with a proxy on economic activity, we make use of the Weir's nightlight data. Now, this data is available post 2012 and it is available monthly. So that's the beauty of this data. It's available monthly, and it's available at a very, very disaggregated level. So here you see this nightlights for Chennai, and this is for 4 different months. It's cut, sorry about that, it's cut here, but this is October 2015, November 2015, December, and Jan 2016. And in that period of that 4 months, Chennai had witnessed a massive flood event. And you clearly see that post that flood event in November 2015, there was dimming of lights. Lights in that city had really dimmed. And it came back after a couple of months in January 2016. And we kind of do this very anecdotal evidence in for 9,700 cities around the world. Now, this database has actually been looked at by different economists as well, the Weir's database, and they have concluded that there have been a bunch of papers that have used it and say that Weir's data is actually a very good indicator for local economic activity. So it captures economic activity. Now the one caveat here is that while it captures different economic activity, it captures of the functioning of offices, factories, power supply, hospitals, etc. One cannot further disaggregate which one of these have been impacted. So ideally, you would want to see whether flood events has impacted commercial establishments, has impacted certain different kind of services, but you can't do that. So you just have an aggregate nightlight data. You don't have it disaggregated by different types of things that contribute to nightlights. Now, coming to our baseline analysis, which is what is the impact of floods on economic activity. The first thing that we do is we try to show results by cities in high income and low income countries. Then we also do a pre-trend analysis that how fast does the city recover after it's hit by a flood. Does it take 5 months? Does it take 6 months? Or is there differences across cities in high and low income countries? The hypothesis here is that if a city in low income country is hit, it potentially could take longer for a city in low income country to recover to its pre-flood nightlight level than cities in high income countries. So our hypothesis was that cities in low income countries will take much longer to bounce back after it's affected by a natural disaster. So let's see what our data says. And we also, the third, which is not there on this graph, is on this slide, is that we do some heterogeneity analysis. We see whether cities in the coast are affected much more, whether high elevation area are protected by flood events, whether capital cities get affected lesser because of the political economy of capital cities, which gets more money flowing in for infrastructure. Now we come to our results. The first headline result is that cities in low-income countries see a much larger fall in nightlights. And on average, if there is a flood event, it affects nightlights by 4 to 5 percentage points. This is for a high-income country. Is cities in high-income countries see a fall in nightlights by 2 percentage points. But however, cities in low-income countries see a much greater fall in nightlights by around 7 to 8 percentage points. So cities in low-income countries are affected much more than cities in high-income countries by a flood event. Now, there is differences when we look at extreme precipitation event, and the magnitudes are much, much larger. You see that an extreme precipitation event affects nightlights by, on average, 15 percentage points. But that is only 10 percentage points in cities in high-income countries, and almost 19 percentage points in cities in low-income countries. And I'm happy to talk in the question answer round whether why these differences in these estimates exist, if asked. So the point here is that cities in low-income countries are affected much more. But do they bounce back as quickly as high-income countries, cities do? Yes, they do. Like, given the data set that we have, both see a fall in nightlights by 1 month post a flood event. Like in the month of a flood, there is a massive fall in nightlights, but it immediately bounces back. Now, ideally, there could be an argument made that the margin that is important here is days and not months. Like cities in high-income countries might bounce back in 5 days, whereas cities in low-income countries might bounce back in 25 days. But given the data set that we have right now, which is a monthly WIRS data set, we can't do that analysis. So right now we can just say that they bounce back equal. Cities in low-income countries bounce back as fast as cities in high-income countries. But hopefully when nightlights data is available at day level sometime in the future, then perhaps there is going to be some heterogeneity there. Now looking at results based on characteristic of the cities. We interact each city by whether if it's in a high elevation area, whether it's a capital city of that country, or whether it is a coastal city in that country. And we find some interesting differences. We find that cities who are in a high elevate cities in high income countries which are in high elevation face lesser impact caused by a flood. And the way to do that is that you see a positive 3% there. So if there is a flood event, the interaction shows you when it's a positive coefficient, it reduces the impact of the negative coefficient of the flood event. So anything positive out here which is interacted reduces the coefficient of the negative coefficient. So you see that if it's a capital city in a low income country, like for example, Delhi, then this is an average coefficient. It's not one city here and there. Like if capital cities in low income countries potentially might be getting a lot more infrastructure funding, and that's perhaps why it sees a lesser fall in nightlights due to a flood event. Or perhaps capital cities are around the world in safer places, but in low-income countries only. That's not the case because that's okay. Floods in coastal cities see a much greater fall in nightlights in low-income countries, and that's the negative coefficient of the interaction term. Whereas floods in coastal cities in high-income countries do not see any difference from, on average, flood events in high-income countries. Now we test for some resilience hypothesis. Now, the way we do this is that ideally you want the impact of a flood to reduce over time, cities to adapt, and the way UN defines resilience is that if a city faces a flood, how fast does it recover? Does it adapt to potential flood events? So to evidence resilience, we see whether deaths caused by floods over time is reducing. And we do this by doing a time trend. We see whether over time, whether when there is a flood event, is there a negative coefficient when your dependent variable is death? And if there is a time trend from 2000 to 2023, so the time trend will move from 1 to 23. As that 1 to 23 increases, does the deaths fall because of a flood event? So we are expecting a negative coefficient when we do the first analysis. Out here in the second one, we interact floods with night lights, and we have a time trend from 2012 to 2023. And just to defend why there is differences in years here is because the night lights data is only available from 2012 onwards, and that's why most of our night lights results is post 2012. But the deaths result is available, the deaths data is available for a longer horizon, and that's why we make use of 2000 onwards with our deaths regression. Now, the third resilience evidence is learning by experience. We come up with an indicator whether a flood is a city is facing a large number of historic floods, which is pre 2012, and we try to understand whether if that city has faced a large number of floods in the historic period, when there is a next flood, is there lesser impact caused by that flood event? Now, to do the death analysis, we make use of a zero inflated binomial regression. Okay, I might go over by, just give me, just give me 10 more minutes, 5 more minutes post that 5 minutes. Yeah, okay. So the dependent variable is deaths from flood. I will only take 5 more minutes more than that, okay? And the main independent variable is the year trend. And what we find is that there is a negative coefficient. On average, we find that deaths are falling over time. However, the reduction in deaths caused by floods in low-income countries is lesser than the reduction of deaths caused in high-income countries. For our nightlights analysis, again, when we do the year trend analysis, we find that the only cities in low income countries see a fall in nightlights over time, and this is not significant for cities in high income countries. And the potential reason could be the baseline itself is very low in high income countries. Now, when we look at learning through experience, where we come up with a continuous measure of previous exposure in that city, we find that there is learning through experience, and this is captured in this flood into exposure regression. We do find that cities, if they've faced high number of previous flood events, then they are showing signs of resilience. The impact of the flood event has reduced if it has faced large number of floods. Now, if we do this by different bin categories, we find that if you faced 25 previous floods, if you faced a lot of floods in the historic period, then in fact you're showing greater signs of resilience than if you faced fewer floods. So these are good signs that if a city has faced a large number of floods, which is not a good sign, but there is signs of adaptation over time. Now, we test for a bunch of hypotheses on adaptation hypothesis, and we test whether if people are moving lesser to risky places. We test whether if critical infrastructure is protecting cities or dams are protecting cities. Now, for our population, for our first set of results, we make use of an annual gridded data set, which is available at the annual level. The hypothesis here is that if there is a flood event in the previous year in that city, one is expecting a lesser increase in population, because you would ideally expect people to not move to that city or people to move out from risky places. Now, we find that negative coefficient only in cities in high income countries. And in fact, we find a positive insignificant coefficient in cities in low-income countries. So people are not adapting in cities in low-income countries. And this could potentially be because there are not too many economic regions in low-income countries for people to move to. And they are willing to take the risk of of staying in risky places, or there could be some frictions in urban to urban migration in cities in low income countries. Now, for our critical infrastructure set of results, we make use of this global database called CSEP, which basically aggregates the different components of what make up a critical infrastructure. And we find that on average, the differences in KISI across high income countries and low income countries are quite tremendous. You find that cities in high income countries have double infrastructure capacity than cities in low income countries. Now, when we interact this with floods, we find that the critical infrastructure only protects cities in high income countries, and in fact it is positive but not significant for cities in low income countries. And this could be potentially because critical infrastructure is very low in cities in low income countries and has not crossed that threshold level of infrastructure for where it matters to protect a city against flood. Or perhaps the quality of infrastructure itself is really bad, and it's not just measuring the infrastructure, but one also has to measure the quality of infrastructure. Now, for a dam results, we make use of a global database of rivers. This is my last results slide, Pooja. And we have dams which are shown in blue out here, and the river segments which are in black. Now, we ultimately say that cities are protected by a dam if it is 500 meters close to the river stream, and if that river stream is downstream of a dam. And that's how we say that it's protected by a dam. We match that city to a closest city in that same vicinity. So we only compare a city protected by a dam matched to a city which is not protected by a dam but is close to that city. And we find that dams protect cities in low income countries but not in high income countries. And that's shown by flood into downstream coefficient. Now, to conclude, this paper is about looking at the heterogeneous impact of floods on the economic activity, and we find that cities in low-income countries face a larger shock. We also find heterogeneous results based on urban resilience. We find that over time, flood-related deaths are falling, but they're falling lesser in low-income countries, and perhaps that's because the population in low-income countries are still moving to risky places, and that's why we don't see as much fall in deaths. We also find that over time, impact of floods has been falling in low-income countries, and number of historic floods reduces the impact of additional floods. The KISI results were interesting. We find that the infrastructure only protects cities in high-income countries and not in low-income countries. Now, to conclude, some takeaways are that there is further analysis required to be done on KISI itself. We need to break KISI into further subcomponents and see whether which of that infrastructure actually matters to protect a city from a flood event. And this can be done for cities in high-income countries. And the moment we know that this infrastructure matters more in terms of protecting a city in high-income countries, perhaps that's what we need to do in low-income countries. This is just, these are just takeaways from the results. Perhaps something else might matter. And coming to road here, Balboni has a paper, Claire Balboni has a very interesting paper on Vietnam road infrastructure. And she finds that doesn't make sense to invest so much in road infrastructure in the coastal parts of Vietnam, which are going to be facing tremendous flood events, does it not make sense to allocate that resources to other parts of Vietnam, and that could have an impact on the critical infrastructure in the future in those coastal areas? There is much more work needed on the microeconomics of adaptation intra-city. We need to understand if information is provided to home buyers in low-income country cities of whether this is the flood, this is a area which is more prone to a flood event within a city than this area, then are we going to see buyers not buying in a risky places and willing to pay a premium in safer places? And this is fair weather do that in the US context. They actually provide flood information on something like a housing.com website in the US for each project, and they find that buyers do respond. They buy the demand for property for in a risky place is much lesser than in a non-risky place, and to buy a house in a safer place, they are willing to buy a smaller house. They are willing to compromise on other amenities to make sure that they are in a safer place. Perhaps we also need to do something like this in low-income country cities. I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much, and looking forward to the comments.
Thank you so much, and for only taking 5 minutes more. Yeah, I mean, I think some of the conclusion, I mean, I think your paper was very, very good, very enlightening. Yeah, but definitely the infrastructure question does play a role, right? Because even if you see in India as well, one of its key things is the coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure. So when they are thinking about the global south and when they are thinking about adaptation, it's definitely an infrastructure focus. So then I would be interested to understand, and I mean, this can do some of your future work, of course, not in this. Isn't then what is it? If you're saying that in lower income countries that the number of deaths are going down and that and there's also a trend of like lower economic losses year on year, then obviously something is helping. And you said they learn by experience. So obviously something is helping them prevent it from becoming more catastrophic in the future. So then if it's not infrastructure, then what is it, right? So that would be an interesting question, because if I'm a policymaker, as you brought up the case of Vietnam, and if I have to kind of make a choice of what to invest in, and it's not in infrastructure, then what is it? So I think that can be something interesting. But I mean, and the other thing, I mean, and this is a bit, I mean, I've been doing climate science for a very long time, so that's something which made me a bit nervous, is that you're saying that, as there are more extreme weather events, actually, cities get better at dealing with them. So does that mean that then we actually don't really have to deal with climate change, because the city is just going to get better and better with dealing with it? Is that the implication then? So that's just a larger question, which I had. Which is a lot of argument that is there. Let's emit as we do, just let's get better at adaptation. So is that kind of what's coming out of this? But okay, now I will leave it to the two discussants. I'll give you around 10 minutes each. And I mean, you can feel free to I mean, reply back, or we can open it more to Q&A, and you have then a more free flowing conversation. Yeah. So maybe I'll start with Farzana.
No, this is okay. So, Sahil, thank you so much for trying to concisely present your paper, which has so much in it. So, you did a great job of presenting it in the limited time that you had. Of course, I'm very impressed by the paper and the sheer amount of effort that it has taken to put together all these data sets. And as you pointed out in the beginning itself, that it's been a labor of love for many years to put these data together to be able to run these estimates. And I would say the paper is very important, very informative, and as is being pointed out, I think is also raising a lot of questions in terms of thinking about how we understand the results that we see. So I'm going to break my comments into two parts. One is I'm going to talk about the technical stuff maybe after I discuss a little bit more about mechanisms, because that's following from the the feedback that Pooja gave just now. So one thing is that, all of your analysis is sort of focused in urban areas and on cities. But when you look or compare low income countries with developed countries, the aspect of rural areas and the structure of the economy is so critical in trying to understand what is the impact going to be of these weather shocks or climate change. So, what do I mean by that? We know there is a lot of rural to urban migration, right? Second is that there is this over dependence on agriculture. So one would expect that the effect of these floods is obviously going to be much more dramatic in rural areas as opposed to urban areas and cities. And so, given a shock, the same shock, if the impact is more on livelihoods and also life itself in rural areas, there is going to be potentially, let's say, a movement of people and also the kinds of work that people are looking for from rural areas to urban areas, right? So, there itself, you have a dynamic which is going to have an impact on the estimates that you are seeing because you are focusing on cities, right? So, for example, when you talk about migration as adaptation or you're looking at deaths, why are deaths not falling as much? It could be because more and more people are coming from rural areas to stay in the cities because the effect is so much more worse in the rural areas, right? So I feel the challenge here is to try to think of this issue in a structural framework which takes into account the rural urban dynamic in low income countries, whereas in in the high income countries urbanization levels are so high, and that's why you're probably not seeing much effect. So for example, when you looked at the capital city versus coastal cities or other cities, the level of infrastructure as an example is so uniform, let's say, that you're not going to see much variation there. But here there are very few urban clusters and urban centers, which are also places where a lot of economic activity is going on, where the effect on agriculture, if it is so negative, then people are going to shift away from agriculture towards non-agricultural activities. And that also implies an increase in migration from rural to urban areas. So, for example, this paper that I have using ICRISAT data, because you have farm plot level data there, and you can look across the same villages over many, many years. And what you see is that migration goes up as a response to both droughts as well as floods. So, extreme weather leads to movement of people. And that means that the population in these cities is going to go up. So the demand on that infrastructure also goes up. And that means that, you may not see too much happening in terms of, let's say, and I also found it interesting, for example, when we were looking at dams as adaptation, because again, I would think that dams is something that is going to have much bigger effects in rural areas, and it's only downstream effects that you're going to see in cities, right? Because if they're able to stop the adverse effect of the extreme effects of floods in rural areas, you're not going to see movements of people, you're not going to see decline in agriculture. So what's happening in that, the structural framework that we need to be able to understand these economies is going to potentially explain some of the results that you see, because I fear that the way you are interpreting the mechanism is sort of not taking into account that structure and is thinking in terms of cities or urban areas only responding through infrastructure or through other mechanisms without these structural shifts in the kinds of occupations people have and the movement of people from rural to urban areas. And I think that for me was the biggest, sort of issue in terms of trying to understand how do I interpret the results that you see. The second was I agree with what Pooja said that the CSE variable that you have, as you point out in the paper, is also cross-sectional. And you don't have time variation. That is so critical here, right? Because that is exactly what we want to know. How is this? As a matter of fact, it's an endogenous variable, right? So it is going to respond to incidents of flood. But we are not able to see that. And I absolutely agree with you. What you said was that you need to unpack that index. I wonder whether you have data, because is this available as a comprehensive index, or there's disaggregated data available on each component of that index? So even if it is at the cross-sectional level, as you pointed out, if you can look at which one of these, if you wanted to look in terms of weighted average of this effect, which one of these components is the one that is affecting?
We do have.
Okay, so that would be really, really important. Um, Now, some of the picky things I'm going to talk about. Number one is about so the same thing. As a matter of fact, when I was talking about learning, when you term it as learning, is it really learning that is happening? So again, is it the city is responding versus something else that is happening, which is again, this structure and movement of people and so on, which is, so how, why would you term it as learning? It's not clear. Technically, on the technical front, in your specification, you have country, month, year, fixed effects. I was wondering whether you can drill down a little bit further to think in terms of districts,
Regions,
state,
yeah.
because you're really presuming that the country is homogeneous, right? I mean, if you look at a country like India, we have so much variation in weather. I mean, you look at east, north, to say that this trend that you might see in month here is going to be the same across the country, whereas you are looking at variation across cities within countries. Is sort of problematic. And I'm sure you can do better than country month here, right? You can do state at
fixed
least.
effects,
You
yeah.
can go down to that. Because I know you can't do city trends because that's what your variation is coming off of. But definitely you can drill down further to that. The second thing that I wanted to really pick on is when you show all these estimates, you are claiming that the estimates for the high income countries are different from the estimates for the low income countries, but you're not showing me actual tests of those being statistically significantly different. Because I saw in some of those graphs, their confidence intervals are probably overlapping. So there will be some instances where those differences may not be significant. So you should just show that throughout in all your tables. I think I will stop here, and I have some further points, but I'll let Rana as very detailed notes. But I think in the conversations, I'll talk more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sana. I think those comments were really insightful. Yeah, I mean, I wondered whether urbanization rates also, because are they falling? Like how do the urbanization rates within versus high income versus low income? Because I mean, I only know this anecdotally, but yes, there is actually a lot of migration based on flooding. It's just that in low income countries, it might be as for Sana said, into urban areas, as opposed to how you said in some high income countries, it's away from them. So I think that would be interesting. But with that, I will leave it to Rana to come in with some comment.
Thanks, Pooja. So I enjoyed the paper thoroughly. Couldn't agree more with both Pooja and Farzana that amazing how you've put together this data set. 9,500 cities, 175 countries, almost 4,000 major floods, really impressive. So my remarks will just focus on a few issues related to data, some mechanisms that might be underlying your findings, and then I'll just connect it to this, Urban Challenge Fund, with the government just released the guidelines on October 15. So let me just start on the data side, on the nighttime lights. So you're right. This VIIRS NTL is very defensible. That's what you have to do. It's probably a very good proxy for what happens to the economics of a city. And I guess that's one reason you would have difficulty in moving this to rural areas, because this is not a good tool for rural areas. But it also may not be a good measure for the recovery from a flood. Yeah, because I mean, just imagine a situation. There's a flood that's hit, household balance sheets gone, assets gone, small firms, assets destroyed. We can imagine that the lights and all come back up, and you can have all sorts of emergency interventions. So I think it's a bit problematic. At least at first glance, it seemed a bit problematic to me. You could dive a bit deeper. What I think you could certainly focus on is the extent of the NTL decline rather than that duration. I think you're on better footing if you just try to use that. How much luminosity actually goes down by after a flood. And another robustness check. What if you restricted, your sample to cities above some population or density threshold? And the reason I bring this up is because you especially for the LIC sample, you're going to have a lot of smaller towns and cities, right? And these are the places which typically, I think, NTL stuff starts to get problematic when you get into peri-urban areas, more rural type areas, and you're probably going to get a lot of those in your secondary cities. So two robustness checks on your NTL. I think the bigger issue is really now, I don't know what to call it, kissy as you do or sissy as Farzana was doing. But bottom line is, I think this needs more more examination. This morning, actually, I asked one of my colleagues who works in the urban infrastructure side. So he took a quick look. There's 7 domains. It's from OpenStreetMaps. And bottom line is, from somebody who's working a lot on water sector urban issues, the points they were making was that for floods, what really matters is the urban drainage infrastructure. And so you're thinking about primary canals, stormwater drains, the roadside drainage network. How are these actually working in cities? Now, the kissy, I'll go with your pronunciation. It does have wastewater treatment plants, but we don't know the capacity, and we don't know anything, at least from what my colleague could tell, about the sewage network. And in fact, a very good point was made by him. He was saying that when you have these cities with low sewage coverage rates, households basically discharge waste into nearby drains. They actually do. It just causes clogging. And we know that happens in our cities. And so actually, trying to take into account the sewage network becomes quite important. Treatment plant capacity. I mentioned that before, but apparently, I mean, that's really the key thing that you need, not whether you have a treatment plant or not. And that probably matters for more of our cities. The water subsystem, I think, data in KC, it's relying really heavily on reservoir data, but that's measuring storage capacity, not really flood management capacity. So again, it's devil is in the details, but this KISSI for policy relevant analysis, I think this KISSI stuff, if you can improve upon it, that I think the big gains are going to be there. And both, Pooja and Farzana have raised clearly the reasons why. Basically, cost-benefit analysis for policymakers is going to be critical, and this kind of work would be extremely useful. One channel that you didn't do on use in this paper, and obviously, I mean, it's a great paper as it is. You've done a lot, but just for future references, land use. And we know that how land is used within cities is going to cause issues. You have high elevation areas, you have low elevation areas, and then you have flood prone areas. And I know this is happening in Dhaka in a big way, where there's places which are really prone to flooding. That's where the low income households are actually moving to. Nobody's doing anything about it, when really what planners should be doing is focusing on the high elevation areas and allowing more density. So really very important land management and urban planning issues come in. If you could get a handle on that, again, I think it would be a terrific way to get policy dialogue going on this really important issue. And I'll come to this very quickly. You have this really striking finding on the 16% NTL decline in coastal cities. Now, what's what are we to take from that? And you know, your point on the Vietnam you cited a paper and then you're talking about, okay, what's a policymaker do? I think this becomes really important. Now, you know, why are coastal cities so important in the low income context? I think is clear because that's where your agglomeration and trade access is. Rest of the country is probably not as well connected. You know, high income country is just so much better infrastructure, etc. They can spread, you know, good infrastructure all over. For low income countries, it's these coastal cities. So, what is the policy implication? It surely it cannot be de-densification. That would destroy the whole agglomeration benefits. And so maybe you're better off actually investing more in coastal protection. So that's sort of opposite to, you know, the conclusion that you were mentioning your Vietnam story comes up with. And I think we have to look into that. We can't just say, oh, just move inland and build over there. These things, you know, they take place over centuries. The ability of a city to really be an agglomeration center. So this agglomeration vulnerability trade-off, another really nice area to look at. Let me just jump to final point, which is the India policy context and how I think actually a next paper of yours could build on this and really use data from India. And there's a policy context. It's the Urban Challenge Fund. So the Urban Challenge Fund, for those of you who don't know, it's you know, it had been announced a long time ago. The government's bringing in 1 lakh crores as funding for states to compete on, but the guidelines were just announced. I think on the 15th, so just a few days ago. And in this, it's about urban infrastructure. A lot of the Urban Challenge Fund is focusing on infrastructure. Interestingly, this issue of drainage infrastructure and flood, it's a big part of the Urban Challenge Fund. And I can really see, you know, you having a field day as the data comes and we see, you know, which cities are actually using the UCF. You'll be getting a lot of data because there is inbuilt into the mechanism is a lot of data collection, monitoring, etc. So you can do a lot of interesting DIDs. You'll get a lot of initial baseline information from the UCF. And you know, if your threshold hypothesis is correct, we really should see that cities that are going to be using this UCF funded infrastructure threshold, they should be the ones really seeing disproportionate reductions in flood. So that's just a point about how what you're doing could really have a nice India focus. Just one, I think, final remark. Yeah, no, actually, I've mentioned that about using this as a DID for the future. So anyways, let me stop there. Great paper. Lots of food for thought for the next round.
Okay, hang on, yeah.
Thank you so much to both the discussants. I'm
I just
sure.
want
Oh, yeah.
follow up something Rana said. You know, something that Rana said really struck me here and I was thinking that one of the things that you haven't accounted for when you're thinking again of mechanisms, because you were talking about the measures of nightlight as not being the right measure, is the government response through public transfers, right? So let's say in developed countries, when you have this kind of a shock, there is going to be a certain response through transfers to households. And we know in India, for example, very often the governments, you know, have new programs for helping poor households and so on, whatever it is. But if that is the case, then that is going to have an effect on the night lights that you observe. Even though economic activity may have fallen, you would still see, because there is this cash transfer or whatever it is, which is sort of supporting the households in this time of shock, right? Or there are other measures like employment guarantees or whatever it is, you know. So what I sense from the paper, what I'm trying to say is there has to be a section where you're thinking of sort of alternative explanations other than your hypothesis about resilience through improving infrastructure and so on. But of course, like everybody here said, talking about the breaking up CC is critical for you to be able to make the case that this is what is leading to the effects that you are seeing. But the challenge there is that you don't have time variation in that, and also that it needs to be drilled down further. But a section where you are talking about what are the alternative ways in which you can explain these differences that you see between high and low income countries. And that includes thinking of the structure of the economy, but also government responses through cash transfers, alternative support mechanisms that exist. And I was wondering whether you actually want to control for population in your specification or density. So in a sense,
But
rather
these are
than
absolute deaths.
Yeah,
right?
and
Are
like-
these absolute deaths or on some?
These are
This-
yeah, no, but
this is
fixed
absolute-
effect. Yeah, they're city fixed effects. So city fixed
but
effects.
fixed effects don't account for trends and changes in
Yeah.
population, right?
So you're talking about the
Yeah, it could be density, but also the size of the city, right? All of that is changing at the same time.
Growth, right? Because they'll be.
Yeah, exactly. So that is something I don't know whether you have it on the right hand side, but that is going to affect a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that Farzana made me think is also, I'm sure the rates of flooding I mean, of course, one is the government support that comes in, but another thing will also be that you're assuming that in high income countries, more people will actually have flooding insurance, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I know a lot of studies when I was doing my PhD, some of my lab mates at Princeton were actually studying how, private insurance acquisition actually then impacts. So I think, of course, one is the government handouts, but one is also that you're assuming in high income countries, there is a lot of more. I mean, when you brought up your example yourself of how people are risk averse when they know that there's more, when there is more flooding in a certain area. So can you, I mean, that shouldn't be too hard, or maybe it is, I don't know how hard the data is to get, but in different cities, can just the rates of insurance? I don't know if that's
I
possible.
think
or
that's
not.
going to be really hard.
Yeah, okay. Maybe it's just easier in a high income country because they were doing it for America. But yeah, I think I won't give you time to respond because there was such a breadth of things to say by the discussants, and we are kind of at 5 o'clock, and our audience has been kind of patiently listening to everything that has been said. And maybe you can come in at the end,
Yeah,
like
fine.
once they speak. So I'll open up the floor. So just raise your hands if anyone has any questions. Okay, so I see 3 hands raised. Okay, now I see 4. So we'll take it in maybe in rounds. I'm going to be partial and give it to the outsiders first and then the CSEP folks. So I'll start with you, sir. Maybe you can introduce yourself also.
I myself, Ravinder Prasad. What I am saying, in a city like in India, Patna, Bengaluru, or Mumbai, every year floods comes. Every year floods come. So what you think, how these can be minimized cost? Because there are so much expenses or cost. Loss in income, people are unable to go move. Movement either there are financial loss. And how can this thing be avoided? Every year comes in some city in India, flood. So what you would like to say?
Then you could go next.
Hi, I'm Dr. Nipra from Terry. We do flood risk assessment for different regions of India and with relation to climate change and how it is going. We study the background and then we do the future projections as well. So when you say flood event, so it is a flood event, one episode of flood that you are considering for different cities. What we do is first we consider the flood, we see the flood depth and the duration for how long the flood has been there. Then accordingly, we map the losses to the based on the land value and the insurances, the other things, the land use that has been everything that has been talked. So have you considered these factors like to map the losses and everything? And also getting developed countries and developing onto the same scale is like very challenging. I see it to be a challenging because when we do it for across India, when we do flood risk assessment or developing for India, we when we do hotspot mapping or identifying the most vulnerable regions, it becomes very difficult for us to divide those coastal cities from the Himalayan region. So, how have you come across with the getting all the developing nations under one name, like cities you've given it? So, thanks.
Lavish.
Thank you. So fascinating presentation, Sahil. Three things. First, of course, I worked on this thing a decade and a half back.
That is why I was defending the Weeds data because I was there.
Yeah. Now, I'm jaded and old information and all of that. But as far as I remember, BIRS very poor at capturing LED lights, LEDs. Now, this is also the period when globally, not just in India, the shift from sodium to LED has been massive, but it's happened across the world. Now, especially after a flood event, you would expect that shift to be faster. So maybe you want to look into that. I don't know how you can, but just for you to consider. The second thing is, again, with night lights, another problem that I used to face was that when you're close to the coast, the light reflects. So there are those errors that happen, especially where cities are next to rivers and to the coast. I don't know how that may or may not impact you, or it may or may not be true with waves and so on, but that used to be a problem. So just a couple of things that you need to just check. Oh, one more thing. The gridded population uses both night lights and impervious surfaces. So you may, because that's the underlying thing. So you can't use one gridded population to look into impacts on lights if you did. If you didn't, then it's fine.
I didn't.
Just a Okay, I want to go focus most on what Rana had said. And perhaps you can just give some 3 or 4 key policy outcomes. And even if they are not there right now, perhaps it's a discussion that it would be really nice to have. That what am I getting for policy from here? As of now, I can't really get my hand on that.
You want to respond to these three and then I'll collect some more.
Okay, just everyone, let me respond to.
Respond to what Farzana and.
I think, no, these are great comments, everyone. Thanks a lot. Farzana, I agree that I think there is a need for a separate section apart from the mechanisms we discuss, other potential things that could impact. And the rural urban migration is a tough one because that data for all the countries would be tough to collect. And I agree that could partly have a result, affect our results on population. But I just don't know how one could take care of it. The only way I think one could take care of it is by saying that this could be another explanation to what our results are. And one of the reasons that could be is that one is seeing rural migrants coming into cities. That's what I've thought about right now. But let me just give it more thought to see what else could be done about that. About the CC and the time invariance, I'll go with the way Farzana pronounced it, CC rather than Kisi, is that we do some tests for the time invariance, and I just didn't show those results because there wasn't enough time to show a lot of robustness results. But we do 2-3 different kind of tests, which I won't go over, but happy to show you in the paper. So the whole thing about Pooja and Rana brought up this whole agglomeration versus vulnerability one. The way you've put it was nice and punchy. Agglomeration and vulnerability is whether one should be investing in coastal parts of Vietnam or not. I think along with investment, one should also come up with rules of the game that would enable self-protection. Like perhaps better pricing, better information about flood-prone areas, like protect the cities, but also provide that these are risky places. These parts in Jakarta could get flooded, so that then buyers could perhaps take that into account when buying a property, and perhaps because there'll be a fall in prices, developers might not build there because the demand has fallen. So there wouldn't be too much lock-in in capital over a few years in risky places if one is enabling self protection. I agree that I think the region fixed effect and state fixed effect is a great idea, and that's something that one can do, and this is easy to do across all countries as well. Uh, okay. Yeah, I wouldn't know how to respond to what should one do if Patna is facing a lot of floods or other Indian cities are facing a lot of floods. Perhaps that paper on India might the paper on India which I could potentially write with Lavish and Rana pushing me could answer that question about the magnitude of flood losses. That data is available in GDIS. Like how much did the data set that we use is GDIS, the Global Disaster Database, and it has data on how much was the impact caused by flood, how much was the destruction caused by a flood. But unfortunately, that data is not available for all flood events. It's very sparse. Yeah. So it's true that we are taking all flood events to be equal. In reality, it's not. And that's why we are doing that extreme precipitation event study. Lavish, your question on LED is something that I can't answer right now, but I'm going to be looking it up. Radiance is taken care of in the Veer's data. It takes care of those things that you spoke about. And graded population and Veers is not used together. So these are two separate results.
I think there was Karthik, Ritima, and we have anyone else with any questions? Okay, then okay, and okay, so Karthik, you can start.
Hi, thank you, Sahil, for the presentation. I think the last time we heard you was the RERA one and now the climate one. Quite a range of things to see. A few things which I'm also looking to get your insights on, or is this something that's already considered? On the migration of population from in low-income countries from these flood-prone areas, while these are also very important for their economy, in the sense for their jobs, for coastal areas, they're largely fishery dependent communities, so for them to migrate out of there is going to be quite hard. And in other places which is flood prone areas, they're considered to be very good for agriculture, so they're not really going to leave their land and really move out of there. Even if these are flood prone areas, catchments are created. So I don't know if migration in low income countries would ever be possible, seeing what these areas really define for the population there. Second being the challenge in the light night, in terms of the weather condition also becoming a bit prominent, which is that there is a 30% bias, I would say, maybe in terms of when there is greater weather conditions and big clouds in the region because of heavy rain. Because we don't think blackouts is a problem during rains, that we are seeing more so in India. So what is the idea that there is lower light because of heavy floods there? Lastly, wanted to know what the critical infrastructure standards would be, and do they vary in terms of what one country considers critical infrastructure versus the other? Because priority in low income countries would be road connectivity, because they think like that's the highest dependent infrastructure that's there, but it might not be flood prone and it might not be protected as much, but they would have to still invest on it because they don't have any other alternative options. Thanks.
So I have also been working on the MDAT database, and as per my understanding, at least that's what I noticed for India. For a lot of years, the data is given state-wise, like for the states that are impacted, or it's given for the entire region or districts that were impacted due to a certain weather event, and it's not like disaggregated. Further disaggregated into cities or rural areas. So I just want to know, how did you isolate the damages, which is death in your case, specific to just cities? Because I'm also facing this issue a lot, and I would like to know more about that.
Yeah.
Shita?
Thanks, Sahil, for the presentation. I have two questions. The initial factors that you controlled for, they include things like what are the infrastructure facilities available, uh, sewage system, how is it? What are the initial conditions? What about density also? Because debt rate in low income might be higher because the density might be higher also. Was that controlled for? Second is you mentioned over time in both type of cities, debt rate have declined. But why has that happened? Is it that in high income countries, information is more available, so people are migrating out of those regions? And in low income, what are the reasons? Is government actually making some investments?
Shishir.
Sahil, great presentation. Couple of clarifications actually. So when you think about it, urban resilience, does one think about flood as sort of a certain threshold of water, I mean, technical flooding, or does it also imply heavy rainfall, which can disrupt lives in cities like Gurgaon, right? So, and second is, I think
It's very close to home.
yeah. And second is, see, there is infra, and second is information, right? So, I, for example, have changed my behavior whenever I see dark clouds. Okay. So, and that has at least helped me a lot. So, I think, yeah, those two clarifications. Thanks.
You can go, sir.
Okay. Karthik, on the weather conditions and nightlight, this is cloud-free data. So it takes care of that. So we only use weeds data they capture it on cloud-free days, not when it's clouded. CC standards would differ across countries, and this is another comment we got, that is there a way to control for differential CC standards in your regression? And this is something that we are thinking about. I think the country fixture could potentially take care of that. Migration, I didn't quite get that question, but let me circle, like I'll come back to you once I've just addressed all
Because
the.
it's hard in sort of in developing countries for migration to happen because they're so dependent on these flood-prone areas. No, I'm just explaining the question.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, he said then how do you then consider that? Because in Western countries, it might be possible to leave. I mean, that same Rishita was kind of saying, but it might not be possible in low-income countries. So
Yeah, I think this is no, thanks for just clarifying that question. And that's something I've also put in the slide. Like there is frictions to urban migration in low-income countries, and more research has to be done on that. Like why do these frictions exist in low-income countries? And that's perhaps one of the factors that could be affecting our result, that people are not moving out from risky places.
I think, Sahil, it was also to do with that they are dependent on that region itself because they want fishery, and the ocean is the one that's causing flooding there. They want the fertile land, but dam and the river basins are the ones that is causing flooding there. But they want that land. They want that infrastructure right next to them for the economy, for the economy.
MDAP data, great. That this is something that we've tackled in two ways. How do we distribute zone 2 to zone 3 in this in the MDAT classification, which is that there are some floods which are only classified that Maharashtra had the flood, but then how do you distribute that to the cities? Now, the way we do that is, first there are two ways. We equally distribute the debt. That's the first way. Secondly, we took the population density of these cities and then the population of these cities and then distributed the deaths across these cities. So that's in the robustness, and the first one is the overall result. Qualitatively, the results remain the same. Rishita, your thing on that is something that we've tried to answer, like why is there differences in deaths, but I think there are still a lot of questions which are unanswered. Like we can't potentially answer all, like we have some resilience tests that we do, but we can't potentially answer all the adaptation mechanisms that could answer the resilience, or else I'll have to write 500-page book for doing that. So unfortunately, this is just a starting step to understand resilience and adaptation in in cities. Shishir, the way floods are defined in the MDAT data, it's not all rain events. If there is some loss of lives or some destruction, and there's one other factor which I have forgotten, and that's how the MDAT classifies, defines floods and records the flood event. I agree that in behavior of people, and that's exactly what, like, if people can self-protect, that's the best thing, because if government is building a sea wall, there is going to be a moral hazard problem where developers will build even more, and then the government will say that developers have built so much more building in flood risky places. Now we need to and this will so ultimately you want people to self protect, and that's what, like, finally this is all about reducing the moral hazard and incentivizing people to protect themselves. So
There's an ability issue in this also, right? I can change my behavior because I'm
I agree,
privileged, right?
the
So,
rich and poor, there will be differences.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're almost coming to a close, and I mean, I don't want to give any closing remarks, but I'm going to actually turn the questions to our discussants as well. So, as you know, we are a New Delhi-based think tank, and we do want to work on things which are quite policy relevant. So, I was just hoping maybe you could, both of you could maybe give us a minute on two on what do you think right now is kind of the important adaptation work, that think tanks like us should be doing. I mean, you mentioned this urban challenge, things are moving from the government side as well, but how could we kind of help them in kind of meeting these? What are kind of the big things that you think we should be looking at?
So, great question, tough question, but to me, this issue of and I made a reference to it, land use planning. It is really, we are just not taking this issue seriously enough. If you think about just India's growth prospects, you think about factor markets, land is the most messed up factor market. And urban land in particular, we are not managing our cities well. And this whole issue of flood losses and all is just one manifestation of poor building bylaws, not doing land zoning properly, and it fits in, I think, perfectly with your work. It's also something. It's funny because I met Sahil before this. We were just chatting that in the incentives of, let's say, academia versus a think tank, they're different, and I think this is perfect kind of thing for a think tank to take forward. Bring in the whole issue of land use planning. It's something that I think the Urban Challenge Fund is not getting at, but states is where the action is. States are the ones which are in charge of all this stuff. It's the perfect kind of thing for a policy think tank to take forward.
Farzana?
I completely defer to
On policy. Good. Maybe the mic on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything to add beyond Rana's policy thoughts. He's the boss.
Okay, so with that, I think unless you have anything to add, maybe on the top of your head, 2, 3 policy outcomes, as Lavish said. I mean, I'm sorry to put you on the spot. I mean, they can be more, just thoughts that you have as opposed to academically grounded. Or,
Right, yeah.
If you just had any 2, 3 things, policy outcomes from the kind of work that you're doing.
I think flood insurance is something that, like, I don't know the take-up rate of flood insurance in India. Is there differential pricing related to flood insurance in India? No, I don't know. That could be an interesting area of research, uh, which would be very policy relevant. Just providing information of risky and non-risky places online on some housing.com or something could again be very important, but for that you require a good measure of which are risky places in India, which are not. But if once scientifically, if that is developed or possible to do, just providing that information online on the Real Estate Regulatory Authority website, where buyers go to check details of the property, also have access to whether this place is going to see a lot of heat future in the future, or is flood prone. That could be important information to have. And yeah, I think.
Okay, thank you all so much for taking this evening us and joining. Of course, thank you so much to the discussants, and of course, let's give a round of applause.
Thank you very much.